As he stepped out the door, he was horrified to discover a strange mist floating in the distance. At first, he thought it was just a natural phenomenon. However, on his way to the town, he suddenly encountered a large number of armed vehicles rushing towards the direction of the mist. Little did he know that this sudden mist would bring him unprecedented despair. He had just parked his car and wanted to call his wife to let her know he was safe, but his phone had no signal. So, he found a nearby public phone booth, but when he picked up the receiver, he discovered that it kept emitting a disconnection alarm. After several attempts, the phone still had no normal response. In the end, he had to give up and walk towards the supermarket across the street. Unexpectedly, the supermarket was unusually busy today. At this moment, 3 soldiers walked in, discussing something important. Then, an NP rushed into the supermarket, looking flustered and discussing with the soldiers. It seemed that something big had already happened. Suddenly, the urgent sound of police sirens rang out outside the supermarket, attracting everyone's attention. The NP quickly left the supermarket, watching police cars and fire trucks speeding by one after another. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Then, a shrill air raid siren sounded, and everyone's eyes became brave. Sure enough, something big had already happened. At this moment, a panicked old man appeared on the street, running frantically towards the supermarket, shouting that there was something in the mist. The man instinctively picked up his son. The man with glasses told the old man to speak slowly, but he was already terrified, constantly telling everyone that someone had been dragged away by the mist and shouting to hurry up and close the door. However, some people still ran out of the supermarket with a lucky mentality, rushing towards their beloved cars. The mist quickly enveloped them, and then several screams were heard, instantly causing everyone to panic and quickly close the supermarket door. At this point, no one dared to act rashly. Among them, George said that it must be a toxic mist, a chemical reaction caused by nuclear wastewater. At this moment, the entire supermarket was like it was on mute, and no one dared to make a sound. Suddenly, a strong tremor swept through, instantly shattering the supermarket. The tremor gradually disappeared, but then a woman suddenly stood up and said that she had to go home immediately because her child was home alone. At this time, a woman hurriedly responded that the end of the world was coming. Then, everyone tried to dissuade the woman, but she was very worried about her child. She desperately hoped that someone could help her. However, everyone began to fall silent, and no one was willing to go out and take risks for the woman. The more she begged, the more no one dared to look her in the eye. So, he turned his head and looked beside him. At this moment, Charlie lowered his head even more. The woman was completely disappointed, and despite others trying to stop her, she walked towards the door as usual. She looked back at these people with tears in her eyes and walked out the door, disappearing into the thick mist. It was the woman's decision this time that laid the foundation for the subversive twist at the end. Afterwards, everyone began to wait helplessly for rescue. However, even when it got dark, they didn't wait for the so-called rescue. At this moment, the man's son began to shiver from the cold. In order to take better care of his child, after settling his son, he strode into the warehouse to look for a warm blanket. However, when he entered the engine room, he found that the entire room was emitting a foul smell. So, he turned off the engine switch, and the warehouse was plunged into darkness. At first, he didn't pay too much attention. He casually turned on his phone screen and continued to look for items that could keep him warm. Suddenly, a strange noise came from the door behind him.